One person's fact, somebody else's fiction. It's hardly new, but is it more relevant now than it ever has been? Is the truth becoming more distorted from reality? We are told by some that we're living in a post-truth world, but is that in itself anything new? This is Roundtable with me, David Foster. Post-truth, they say that is when information that appeals to the emotions and personal beliefs is more influential than the actual fact. And we do live in an age where information is constantly streamed to phones, TVs, computers from so many different sources. It is difficult to know what is rooted in the truth and what is not. Are lies dressed as truth, reshaping our world, or has post-truth always been a reality?
We will make America great again.
Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
Underestimated outcomes that have divided the world, and in their wake forced us to question what is real
because the people have been lied to
and what is not.
Fake news.
Does the rise of Donald Trump and the UK's decision to leave the European Union herald a new era where truth is lost in the noise? When promises are hollowed out by the hysteria, facts manipulated to effect change? Are we living in a post-truth world? Post-truth is when emotional appeals are more influential in shaping public opinion than objective facts. Riding on the coattails of populism politics, post-truth was the Oxford Dictionary's word of the year last year. But in an age when it's never been easier to check facts, how have we ended up in a place where falsities and half-truths have become the reality?
£350 million a week and spend on our priorities here in this country, including on the National Health Service.
Have facts become the victim in the crossfire between new politicians and the establishment?
But I'm president and they're not.
Between press secretaries and the mainstream media? Challenged by one side, branded as fake news or alternative facts by the other? Or have they been drowned in the sea of information available to us online? Our beliefs, whether based in fact or not, reinforced through complex algorithms and spread throughout our social networks. In a world with 24-hour news and a wealth of information at our fingertips, separating fact from fiction is becoming increasingly difficult. In the post-truth world, there is no stable, verifiable reality, just an endless battle to define it. It may be a recent buzzword, but is it a new concept? Online, on our screens, or at the ballot box? Have we always ignored facts if they contradict our beliefs? And if so, who is to blame? Join us for today's Roundtable from Washington, D.C., Mika Mosbacher, author and Republican. She says social media and the internet are responsible for spreading false information and untruths. Max Goldman from Sense About Science, who says the truth is often politicized to score political points. The journalist George Brock has been a professor of journalism at City University. Steve Fuller, immediately to my left, author of the book Post-Truth, Knowledge as a Power Game, and also at the table TV and marketing executive Frank Radis, who has worked with Mr. Trump on The Apprentice, and he says journalists need to market themselves better. Thank you, every one of you, for joining us on Roundtable. Let me come to you, first of all, George Brock, and say, look, post-truth, if you want to put a label on it, is nothing new. In effect, it is a form of propaganda, but something new is happening, and I'm not sure what that is. What do you believe it is?
Digital technology in two words. Digital technology makes it much easier to copy stuff. It makes it harder to know where it comes from. It makes everyone a journalist if they want to be. Anyone with a smartphone can now publish something. And that changes the game and the rules and the scope of everything, and it makes it much, much harder to know what is true. And for journalism, that's a gigantic challenge.
And has it all been put into focus by Donald Trump's victory in the United States?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the his use of digital technology has been one of the things. But I take a different position, that it's not the digital technology that is the problem. It is the digital technology that is the thing that allows the problem to propagate. And so I don't think it's the digital technology in and of itself.
Well, technology is neutral. That is reasonable. But all I was trying to say was it provides an opportunity.
Because of it, more people are able to do things that they've never been able to do before.
Exactly.
I think
Exactly so.
But I do think part of what you're pointing to is just democratization. In other words, when you talk about the prevalence of digital technology and the ability for people to become their own journalists and so forth, you're talking about the possibility of more people than ever before being involved in the production and distribution of knowledge. And that itself, I think, for a lot of the traditional journalistic community is the problem.
well, it's not just not, but it's not knowledge.
That is the problem to a large extent, because traditionally, when we've talked about the truth, we've talked about it coming from relatively few channels, right? The idea of broadcasting initially was a few sources spreading out in many ways, but now we have a much more distributed way in which news is being presented, and that is a feature of democratization, and people need to live with that.
Let us bring in Mika, because you've been part of the Republican National Convention.
Yes.
You work closely on the election, and I think the consensus here is that Trump made it sexy alternative, the truth, the post-truth alternative facts. But effectively what he did was he said, liar, liar, pants on fire to everybody else. I'm the only one telling the truth.
Exactly, and truly, if you look at this, and we go back and look at this from an emotional, logical position in this country, it was very clear that Trump was entertaining. He said things that were sort of P.T. Barnum, gladiators on stage during the debate. He was absolutely larger than life. He'd been a household word for 30 years, and people tuned in like a modern-day Game of Thrones. Did they believe 100% of the campaign rhetoric? No, but they didn't care because he painted this optimistic, positive picture about what this country could look at. And I think the election was a referendum against Hillary Clinton and also Obama. And quite frankly, Hillary's message was boring.
So,
And he was
you were
able
nodding ahead
to
as
depict
well.
her as more dishonest.
I can agree with a lot of that. I think a lot of academics, experts, took the referendum result, Trump's victory, as almost a sort of personal vote against them, as against expertise. I don't think it was that at all. I don't think we can take from what happened in 2016 that the US, the UK public don't want the truth or aren't interested in the truth. These votes happened for other reasons, perhaps lack of confidence in the establishment as it was, or whatever the reason was. It wasn't because people suddenly abandoned truth or the desire for trustworthiness.
I think the key to what Mika was saying was that people just didn't care. I mean, and I also think, though, that you were talking about the dissemination of
and that
knowledge.
predates Trump.
Yes.
Trump is just taking advantage of something that's already been there for at least the last 20 years since the advent of the internet and people being able to find alternative sources of information.
I think it's even before that.
And I also don't. So it's not new. I mean, in the sense in which you can't hang it all on Trump. Trump is just a guy who actually sees what's going on.
He made it sexy. He made it mainstream. I mean,
well, that was the
been
marketing.
around thousands of years, and we're talking about simply propaganda, aren't we?
No, we're not just talking about propaganda, no, because you rightly said it's been democratized.
Yes, that's the key point.
But we've also discovered there's a downside to this democratization. Not all information is of equal value.
Well, that's why people didn't want to democratize originally, right? Walter Lippmann.
No.
Right. We go back to the history of journalism, right?
The democratization is irreversible. But we can't treat everything that everyone says as of equal value. Well,
what do we do?
Journalists try to say, I'm going to show you my workings. I'm going to show you my evidence. Let's hope you believe it.
Well, look at what Facebook's trying to do right now with setting up a sort of a journalistic knowledge area so that there's some kind of fact-checking going on. I actually don't I think it's a great thing that they're trying to do that, but I don't think it can work.
No,
it's
I
too
think
big.
technical fixes might be a part of it with the social media platforms, but I think there are two big things that people can do, particularly people who consider themselves experts or people who are producers of official knowledge. They can actually take a look at themselves and ask themselves, why does there seem to have been this kind of crisis of confidence or lack of trust? I think a lot of experts or people who consider themselves to be broadcasters of the truth assume that they deserve trust, whereas actually you have to earn trust. You have to prove yourself trustworthy to the public. And that is something that the sort of traditional media sources, traditional sources of authority, have to do a bit of self-searching on that. And organisations like mine
I'd
sort of
like
tries
to
to help
bring
them do that.
Mika back
This is true.
in at this point. In terms of
Yes.
the debate we're having here, I suppose most people around the table would consider themselves to be thinkers, if not necessarily deep thinkers. We think about things, but the vast majority of people don't stop to consider things as deeply as that. They just accept or they don't accept.
Come on. Don't be patronizing.
No, I didn't want to be patronizing, but the vast majority of
think
people
they
do
do.
not have time for that. Mika.
To some degree, this election was an escape. People were concerned about feeding their families, and Trump understood that the GOP establishment, and I was part of the establishment, kind of went through a 12-step program to wean myself from politics as usual. Trump understood. He understood that the message was no longer resonating with the base. And he ran as an outsider, which is interesting because even Bill Clinton and Obama ran as elite outsiders. They were running against the establishment. And this resonated with American people, and they were tuning into debates. I was surprised at the number of young people who couldn't wait to get home where they DVR'd a debate.
Okay, so
And
perhaps I'm
debates
totally
normally
wrong, and
were
people do
boring
consider
and
these
didn't
things
count.
much more deeply than I imagine they do. And forgive me if there was a patronising
They just
suggestion.
reach different
Well,
conclusions.
yeah,
Those conclusions are based on what?
I think that's a very benevolent way of looking at it. I think what you have in America is a fracture between two sets of people who don't agree about how you establish truth. And that's a really bad situation to be in. We're not that far from it here in the UK. We've had those kinds of arguments about Brexit and so on. But if you lose your sense of collective reality and you fail to agree about how you establish what's true, I'd say you were in a bad place.
But
Does
when you-
knowledge matter? I mean, it's come up twice.
But it's how
Knowledge-
you weight
yes,
the
knowledge
evidence.
matters.
How you weight the evidence.
and what you consider important. I
Yes.
mean, there are no such things as alternative facts. I hope we can agree that. But clearly, there is an objective truth, and science and evidence is sort of a way of trying to get as close to that truth as we can. But within that, there is huge space for people to have completely different lives and understandings of the same facts. And that, I think, this democratization of the media has really opened that up. And
But you make a good point about
Everybody
science.
has to agree. I'm not saying that everybody has to
But
agree.
you make a good
People
point
debate
about
stuff
science.
all
I
the
think-
I want
time,
to steer this
but
in
they
a
debate
slightly
stuff with a
different
foundation
direction, if I
about
may,
how you establish
about
what
how
might be right.
people are using this. Talk about the troll factories in the United States. Talk
I
about
think
the
media has
marketing
lost trust.
of Donald Trump. How are we seeing this being used by
So is the
powerful
politician.
entities?
Yes.
I think, I mean, there is a huge space now, and this is the biggest worry that I have, that people talk about a post-truth world. It's not the public is post-truth, but there is a danger that politicians and other people in authority will internalize this idea of the public as post-truth, and that opportunists, not to name names, will take advantage of that and get short-term gain in really sort of exploiting this idea that people don't want truth and facts when they do.
One of the things that's happening is there are a number of very powerful actors, state actors in some cases, Russia would be an example, trying to blur people's idea of how you establish what's true. And if you can blur that, you can create a great deal of
You can
confusion.
create that blur through reach and frequency of single messaging. So an example of that might be that the Environmental Protection Agency is no longer saying that there is climate change. They have been told to say that there is extreme weather conditions. So you say that over and over and over again, a lot of people are going to say there's no climate change. And that's one of the problems, because now, the President of the United States has not only the bully pulpit, but he's got this Twitter account that goes directly to these people constantly, over and over again, with this same single message. And that is an understanding of how to utilize marketing to get a message across to make people change their minds.
But in an open democracy, you're going to allow the president to communicate with the people, aren't you?
Yes. I'm not suggesting that you don't allow him to do it. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that there's a masterful use of it.
Well, but he actually does it in a channel, Twitter, where people potentially can say things in response, and they do.
And do.
Right? And so you get a kind of running sense of how people are responding to everything he says, and he probably takes that pretty seriously. So in this respect, we're getting a kind of democratization we've never seen before between the elected leaders and the people who elected them.
And I think his trust levels are falling because of that.
About perhaps journalists,
And look
those
how
of us
he
around this
leads.
table, feeling that we've lost some influence, perhaps?
I think, yeah, there has been a loss of influence of elites, of the establishment, of traditional sources of authority, and that clearly there are dangers in that. But we can't lose the good side of that, or what we've gained. And I think those of us who would defend the idea of there being established facts, objective truths, the value of experts and institutions, all these things, we have to look at how we can earn that trust back, not just complain that the trust is gone.
If you create much, much, much more information, and journalism is a smaller chunk of all that information circulating in the world, journalists are bound to feel they're playing a smaller role.
And I think
which is exactly what's happening.
Exactly, and I think Mika wanted to make a point on that very subject.
Yes. I did, because first of all, look at the fact that he is able to dominate and control the news cycle with a single tweet.
Exactly.
Look how he started a feud with General Sessions. He was able to sort of pull a switch and bait and get the and help people divert attention away from the Russian collusion and the Mueller investigation. And he kept that feud going with Sessions for several days.
Until
and I think a lot of people within the
Sessions
administration wondered, was it what's really,
Well, until Sessions went ahead and did what he wanted him to do, which isn't going to make any difference. What Sessions says will not make any difference.
No, it wasn't going to make any difference.
Where are we going from
No,
here? It's
but
not going
the
to change,
difference
is it?
was he was able to control the news cycle. He was able to control the news cycle.
We can't put
And
this one
think we
away.
can-
look at CNN today. They're talking about the pro-Trump bot, pro-Trump 45, a Russian bot tweet that came out this morning. And Trump has been interacting with it because it's a positive message.
And nobody
cares.
cares.
And it's creating news.
Nobody
so why
cares.
are we talking about Mueller and the investigation? No, we're talking about tweeting.
But this is white noise, isn't it? I mean, it's just out there distracting people, but while the real work is
It is
going on
white noise.
elsewhere.
And and there's short-term benefit perhaps for people to generate that white noise, but it won't last forever. I think
brilliant
the
marketing.
truth comes out.
But this is the thing that's interesting. It'll depend what happens, where we are a year from now, what we will say about this episode. Because it's easy to say now, oh, this is white noise, the truth will prevail. But this is faith. You're talking faith here.
No, okay. I can't
this
prove
is
it,
faith.
obviously, but it's not
the
faith.
tweeting
It's
may
based
be
on
the new look of media coverage. I mean, this is the point. You actually don't know it.
No, I don't know. Obviously, I don't
I
know.
think
Can't
that
claim to know what's
short term in
gonna
this
happen.
case is 3.5 years minimum.
Yeah. Well,
minimum.
I can't predict that, but what you can see is that in the past, that every generation has to have its new learning how to deal with new media, literacy of one kind or another. People learn how to read newspapers. Back in the 18th century, people had to learn how to read political pamphlets. Social media is very new. We're all sort of children with it. And I think there is and organizations like mine that try and help people be more critical of information sources, but actually have the literacy to ask the right questions and to filter out some of that white noise. I think it is possible. I don't think I'm being Pollyanna-ish for saying that's possible.
Each time there's a new form of communication, you get chaos, everybody goes, it's absolutely wonderful. And the next moment they panic and go, it's absolutely terrible. And then everybody kind of settles down. We haven't got to that stage yet with digital social media.
Yeah, but the problem is that digital social media claims to be criticizing the mainstream media. In other words, they claim to be the critical voice that you're talking about, okay? You think you're the critical voice.
No,
you're
not
the
necessarily.
establishment
It's
trying to shore up in light of what is trenchant criticism.
It's a question any source should be asking itself, and actually if there's one good thing that will come out of this whole post-truth debate and this crisis, is the much more self-critical establishment media or mainstream media who are just as responsible for sort of bad reporting reporting and biases and all these sorts of things than the news sources. So I think there does need to be a general questioning.
See, the tweeters of today are like the Jacobins, right, in the French Revolution. It's like, that's what they're like, right? Because they're the ones who are fundamentally questioning in a very basic way and calling the ancien regime fake and all the rest of it. And of course, in the long term of history, this has been a mixed blessing, right? And people can judge these guys differently, but they don't come out to be quite as stupid as I think a lot of the tweeting.
Yeah, and I can agree with you. I agree with you.
Look, we're going through the exact same situation right now that we went through when Woodward and Bernstein were going after Richard Nixon. And he was saying the same kinds of things about the press back then. The press set itself up in the situation where you ended up with 24-hour news and cable news, which automatically took journalists out of the field and made them go on the air all the time before they had an opportunity to actually dive into a story and get their assignment desks to edit the content and get the real story out there, or at least what they were saying was the real story, precursor to where we are with digital news
on the understanding that this is not going to change, that we're not going to have to put it away. It may change in some shape, as George is suggesting. Do any one of you here think that what we're seeing has been detrimental to society as a whole?
Well, I think the loss, I mean, if you start to disagree about how to see truth and how to establish it and agree what it is, then I think you're in some danger. I don't think that's a very advanced process. I don't think we're in a post-truth society, but truth is under a lot of attack.
Mika, you wanted to say something, please do.
Well, how do you define truth?
I mean, we do tolerate actually quite a large
lack. Now people are very involved in the elections. Because they're interacting with each other on Facebook and on Twitter. We had record turnout in 12 primaries in 2016. I think part of this is because people no longer feel that their vote doesn't matter. They have a voice.
Well, there is that point.
Actually, their vote doesn't matter in a situation.
I only stopped you because the satellite delay makes it all rather difficult.
I understand. But I actually agree with her point, and I do think that what we're going to be seeing with this kind of world is that we're going to see more involvement. And in fact, look, historically, we've actually tolerated a wide range of opinions. And people, you know, even in ordinary circumstances, have thought about the world in quite different ways, and yet we've been able to live together. It's only in terms of when we're talking about these kind of crucial things like, you know, presidential elections and specific decisions where everybody has to, as it were, agree to the outcome, that then this matters.
But
well,
you're talking very much about societies which we approve of. In societies which are far more authoritarian, you could see this used as a tool against the people, even if the people have the means by which to defend themselves using this tool. It's very confusing.
That's precisely what's going on in Russia at the moment. I'm in favor of empowerment. I'm in favor of very broad spans of ideas. But there is a difference between a very broad span of ideas and a fundamental disagreement in society about how you establish what's true. And the latter is a dangerous thing.
Yeah, and the tool is
My
not going to be the problem.
question was asked, what is truth? I'm not saying that there is any solid version of truth, but there are things which we do in using evidence and examining it which get us a little closer to the truth. It's a constant process.
Scientific
History
method.
goes on, science research goes on.
I'm going to give one of the last words to Max, because he's more of the generation that has sort of seen this come up. We've lived with the old, now we have to live with the new. But this is the new, this is the norm, is it?
This is the norm, and I think it's a good thing, despite the dangers. And as you said, technology is always neutral. It can be used for good and bad. But I think the short-term gains that some opportunists and some populists are getting from kind of misusing social media, or even governments, whether it's Russia or whoever else, I think in the long run, the democratization of opinions and views, the idea that we're no longer deferent to a small number of authority voices, the fact that everyone can access information, this has to be a good thing. And the task of the establishment is to equip and empower people to understand things properly.
Very often it is a reinforcement of an idea you already have, rather than looking for alternatives.
You need to get people out of their filter bubbles and out of their social worlds.
Keep telling them something over and over again, you're reinforcing the position. It's not a bad thing, though.
Yeah, but I'm not so sure that Russia and China are that much different from the United States, let's say, from the standpoint of the official media, okay? I mean, I just think that there's a sense in which the United States is not able to, as it were, control the alternative stuff the way in which the China and Russia might be able to do.
I'd say that was a very basic difference.
Yeah, the
Okay,
division
but
of
I think
powers
that-
in a
but we
society
should
is
cast the
what
difference
those
that
checks and
way,
balances are.
rather than to get, overly epistemological about truth and things like this.
Sure.
Well, such a long word.
I like that. It's a great word. It's a great
The
word.
program, that sort of leaves us a little bit stumped. Final word from you, Mika.
Oh, my final word is that people continue to be extremely engaged with Donald Trump. They don't care about what's going on with the Mueller investigation. His base hasn't changed their mind about him. The stock market is booming. We've had the 9th record day. GDP is up 2.6%. He's added 1 million jobs.
And that.
His base is going to stay loyal.
Okay. And that is a fact.
Yes.
Or is it? That's what we've been wondering here. Listen, thank you all. Mika Mosbacher, thank you very much from the United
That's a
States.
fact.
Very, very early in the morning and very hot there. We appreciate you coming on to Roundtable. To everybody here in the studio, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's always been a part of society, what we've been talking about. But has the internet given all of this a life of its own? You have been watching Roundtable with me, David Foster, and that is a fact. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.